Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're digging into some commentary around the alleged assassination of Charlie Kirk.
Right. And our focus isn't on the event itself, but on how this specific source material analyzes potential culprits.
Exactly. The mission is to really dissect the framework the source uses, who they think would be responsible, and maybe more importantly, what they want us to take away about critical from all.
And it's interesting because the source explicitly tries to structure this, moving away from, well, what they call the cult of conspiracy.
Okay.
So we're looking at their kind of hierarchical list of suspects, supposedly guided by Kirk's own public warnings. The goal seems to be pushing for intellectual discernment.
Okay, so let's unpack that first here then. The source frames it around people who'd want to, quote, murder this movement because they can't. And they say Kirk himself talked openly about this, describing the left as people who would use the sword if they had.
Strong word. And they call them very violent people at their core, people who can't debate. That puts ideological opponents right at the top, doesn't it?
It does. And the source tries to back this up, connecting a specific political movement to, well, violence.
Yeah, they bring up the Minnesota shooter incident.
Right. They label that individual a transformer, Antifa, radical leftist.
Very charged language. And they use that to argue that this kind of violence is rooted and based in that specific ideology, according to their analysis.
Okay, so that's the top suspect group. But the source doesn't stop there, does it? It brings in global threat.
No, it broadens out. The second and third tiers mentioned are jihadists or Islamists, and interestingly, certain nations.
And the link there, Kirk's own statements again.
Precisely. The source reminds us Kirk spoke a lot about Islam, famously tweeting that Islam is not compatible with Western civilization.
So that provides a pretty clear motive for groups like the Islamic Brotherhood, at least in the source.
Definitely. And then there's the geopolitical angle, which gets into, well, money and influence.
Ah, okay.
They specifically call out Qatar. The claim is Qatar has spent billions funding U.S. universities, way more in the last, say, 4 years than the previous.
And the argument isn't just charity, right?
No, the source frames it as an ideological investment, trying to shape narratives in the very university spaces where Kirk and his organization, Turning Point USA, were, active and trying to have an impact.
So it's about counteracting his influence.
That's the implication. And China gets mentioned, too, for similar reasons, as another major power whose, let's say, strategic or economic interest might be compromised by Kirk's type of act.
It's quite a layered argument, moving from domestic ideology to these huge sort of hidden global financials.
It is. But it feels like this whole structure, this hierarchy, is really set up to pivot towards the source's main.
Which is challenging that narrative that Jewish people or Israel might have been involved.
Exactly. The source really pushes back hard on that.
Yeah.
They question the motive, asking, why. They point out that figures who often attack Israel, like Candace Owens or Tucker Carlson, are still very much active.
So no silencing pattern there, they argue.
Right. And this is where the source really leans into this idea of a critical thinking failure by the public.
How so?
Well, they criticize people for focusing, say, on just a couple of Jewish donors pulling funding, comparing it to Trump's donor situation instead of looking at the alleged perpetrator.
The one who supposedly confessed.
Yes. The source emphasizes believing those who claim responsibility. They mention this young man, allegedly turned in by his own father, who apparently admitted it and identified as a left.
And they use an analogy.
A very stark one. They compare it to 9/11, saying al-Qaeda claimed responsibility, but, many people ignored that for years, chasing conspiracies instead.
So the source is saying the leftist admission is just as clear-cut, but people are choosing to ignore it.
That's the core of their argument there. It's presented as undeniable proof being willfully overlooked.
Which brings us back to that central theme of critical thinking.
Absolutely. The source states that critical thinking and discernment are more necessary today than ever before, especially, they say, in an age of disinformation.
They use that quote, right, about 50 lies circling the solar system before the truth even gets started.
Yeah, before the truth just got up and had breakfast. It paints a picture of information chaos.
So what's the big takeaway here for listeners?
I think the source is really hammering home the need for constant vigilance for discernment, especially when you've got all these competing motives, ideological, financial, political, being thrown around.
And they even look ahead, warning about technology.
Right. They specifically mention AI and deepfakes, warning that soon it might be almost impossible to tell a real video from a fake one, making deception even...
That's a chilling thought, extending way beyond this one event. The source ties all this deception, political and informational, back to what they call an eternal truth.
Which leads to a pretty provocative final thought, doesn't it? The source asserts that self-delusion and deception will be the greatest challenge of our time.
So what are the implications of that? If the source is right, maybe the biggest battle isn't finding the external enemy, but maintaining our own internal, intellectual honesty and rigor.
Something to definitely mull over.